possible that all the ones prior to such and such a date were all assigned the same ones or something.
What did you talk about J.D. Brody?
Not much. Ken would know a lot more about J.D. because he's the one that did the deal with him. But you could haul him back in here for one thing.
Well, we've done it. I think he and I have done it a little bit. I asked him.
Okay.
Oh, you guys. What?
I know. Just a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I reworked the deal we had with J.D. We had an unusual deal with him, where it was a profit sharing deal rather than a royalty deal. And so what that meant was that and you'll notice this on some of the royalty statements, and you probably also could find the correspondence in there about how I renegotiated the deal with him. But basically, we had to keep track of all the expenses every time and deduct the expenses, off the income. And so there was this extra calculation that didn't fit our computer system, that I had to do manually every single time. So for years, since that album goes way back there, I was doing that, and I was just getting kind of tired of it, and everything else was truly getting computerized. And it would be that sometimes, we just reprint something, and it would bring up enough expenses that, plus it was done across all his albums, too. Or you put out a new album, suddenly he wouldn't get any royalty money for a couple of years, because he had to earn back all the money that we'd spent on all the expenses on the new album was being, recouping against the other ones. And so he was kind of this on-again, off-again royalty recipient. Sometimes he'd get very good-sized checks, then he wouldn't get any for a period or two. I finally just asked him if we could please move over to a standard system, and I looked at, what his historical income had been. He was, of course, worried that we were trying to negotiate it from the standpoint of figuring out a way to cut him back, so that in the end he would net out less. There was really no way to know what he was going to come out with one way or the other, but I tried to project things, and I think it's worked out pretty well, because he's been getting significant checks every period now, instead of, this kind of alternating thing, or off and on stuff. But there's no way to, it'd be interesting to look back, but I don't really want to. Because then I'd have to do all those manual calculations to do it.
I think Ken told me that the derivation of that profit sharing plan was, in a sense, I forget if he said that either you felt you couldn't really approach J.D. or J.D. was uncertain about you.
I'm sure he was hard to convince. Ken and Marion were the ones that worked on him going into the trade or at festivals and stuff like that. But he was kind of a significant figure at that time, especially when he started out with Ricky and Tony Rice. Nobody knew that they would become even bigger than him at the time. But he would have a trailer at a bluegrass festival, and other people would just come in their cars or something. He was, a bus or something. He was at a somewhat different level, and even though, in fact, most of the time he was just playing at a Holiday Inn in Lexington every weekend. But still, he was a real step up to do that. And that album was, of course, a classic album. That just saw Alison Krauss quote in Billboard, I think last week, said something like it's the greatest album ever made.
Whoa,
something like that.
Why did he go for it? I mean, I'm wondering about that. You were not too much then. You'd done the Dell album.
Well, what year did it come out? Can you tell?
I believe it came out in '74, but I don't know.
Let me see. 44 couldn't have been that early. 76, 77, I would think. 75 was 0043. That's immediately adjacent number. I don't know. Here, it came out in August 75.
Okay.
The same month we put out Joe Val's second album.
Yeah.
I don't know. How many bluegrass albums have we done before that? Well, in a way, between old-time music and bluegrass, 43 previous albums, Connie and Babe. Mark O'Connor had a later number, but his album came out beforehand. That wouldn't have impressed J.D., though, because it was a full-time fiddle album.
Right.
There wasn't really a whole lot of real bluegrass records that we put out, because we actually tend to do more old-time music.
And that's kind of my point.
Country Cooking, Tony Trishka, but he was so weird, those first album, that it was bluegrass. Yeah, it's hard to know. I'm not sure he had any better options, though. I don't think that he'd had an album for quite a while. And I don't think, I mean, County, it wasn't the kind of record County would have done at that point. Rebel would have, but we would have been a better bet than Rebel. Our Lee wasn't, into bluegrass that much. Folkways hardly existed there. I mean, we probably looked and were, as it turns out. I mean, I think it would have been good perception. But we probably looked like a sort of a fresh place to start with that had a potential to get beyond being Jaylin Records in Kentucky, or kind of local homegrown label that could take him up to a higher level.
Was Rebel too lowbrow at that point?
Yeah, I think so. The sense that changed a little bit, but it was just run by anybody that thought carefully about what they were doing. Having an album come out on Rebel Records with a Confederate flag logo and so forth. I mean, that's a little limiting in some regards. So, I think some people realize that.
Yeah, now that album was well reviewed and widely reviewed, wasn't it? Had that happened to you before?
The country cooking might have impressed him in a way, too, to the extent that he knew that, because, I mean, they were certainly doing innovative stuff, as J.D. was trying to do that with that album. He wasn't trying to do Jimmy Martin revisited or anything.
Well, I guess before I turn to the reviews, when he was approached by Ken and Marion, you just wanted him. You didn't know what he had in mind, did you?
I don't know that we knew the lineup that well at the point that they could talk better to that. I mean, J.D. was, a different kind of character. You know the story about this on the cover and stuff?
Yeah, pulling back, right.
Yeah, so he was, but he did that. I mean, he didn't mind having to be on the cover, too. It was more our decision to take it back so we get better sales for it.
What kind of a guy was he? Did he see he was kind of alien to him?
I imagine.
Maybe a little alien to him.
Yeah, because it was like we were from a couple different worlds, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know what he thought about it all.
I mean, Trishka's easy.
Yeah,
contemporary.
Yeah.
Even Blake is more like you guys.
Right, he was a hippie then.
Yeah.
But J.D. wasn't.
Right.
And who knows?
Did you get to know him?
No, I didn't.
Ken did?
Yeah.
Okay. Getting back to when did you?
A lot of the time, I've been in the background more. I mean, there's some musicians, the reggae musicians would know me more. And I do a lot of the more academic stuff, all the stuff with Mark Wilson or the UNESCO's theories of Lomax stuff. I do a lot of stuff that is Ken's out on the front lines, seeing people at festivals and stuff like that. And that's pretty much always been the case. In that first year or two, I was thrown around a lot, but since that point, given that I had a teaching thing to some extent, I was working on my dissertation, and I did our European setup distribution stuff overseas. I did a lot of that business kind of stuff, but not so much seeing the musicians.
When did you first get some reviews that excited you?
I don't know. I can't remember the first couple albums getting reviewed, but I'm sure they might have been. Although I don't even know where. But, I couldn't tell you.
Aside from moving...
Sing Out maybe would have mentioned something.
Yeah. Nothing you clicked, saved, made a conscious fuss over?
Not that I remember now. Sing Out did the first thing I really remember was Sing Out did an article about us as a company.
John Cohen wrote that.
Yeah, and that's the first thing. That was the first really significant thing. I don't know when it was, but I would guess 74 or so. You know, the photograph.
It was 72.
That early? Okay,
Yeah,
wow.
72.
Yeah, come to think of it now, where the photograph was taken, it would have had to be.
I'm always around if you want to hear.
Yeah. It'd be funny. I haven't read it for 20-some years, and it'd be interesting to read again. I remember the picture, but I haven't thought about the article since that time.
It's very much of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Philosophical binge which embraces collective living. No, I really think that was true.
Yeah.
Sing Out was, I guess, the only game in town. There was no Bluegrass Unlimited or...
It might have been a little staple publication or something back then.
No Old Time Herald. There was something.
Now, sometime soon after, there was a magazine called Old Time Music that came out of London. That was around for about 30 issues or so. That was a really good one. They reviewed a lot of our records in depth.
Okay. Did you keep those things? As far as you know?
I wouldn't know where they were. I did.
Okay.
I did keep them, but I
Oh,
don't
you
know.
did? Oh, yeah. I see.
But I don't know where they would be right now. I don't know.
When did you... I know early on you were involved in the formation of New York, but it's kind of a business organization. Did you mesh yourself at all with the whole, or was there, 10 years earlier, there was a whole folky world going on in terms of old-time music and what have you. I know you did some of that.
Yeah, we mentioned those couple organizations,
Yeah.
music organizations, sort of. But
I wondered if you were plugged into an ongoing scene heavily.
I'd say not. I mean, I don't remember any other organizations like that in particular. I mean, there were some around the country, but I don't remember our being involved with any of them that much. We kind of still that way almost. We still kind of do our own thing. I mean, Ken's been an officer of IBMA and Folk Alliance. He's one of the founders of the Folk Alliance. And Marion's been some blues things. I've, on the Grammys board now and stuff. But we've all been involved in Merit in the past, but not for recent years. And then we don't spend a lot of time trying to be on boards or whatever, I guess. Or even being active members of stuff like that.
Were you running down, were you hooked up, for the first few years, I guess, Izzy Young was still around the folklore center in New York. Did you ever have any contact with him?
Oh, right. We'd stop in there, and he carried our records. He always, he wasn't all that systematic about stuff other than maybe the music lessons or music instruments, but in terms of, he always had a record stand, but he would never think to reorder or something like that, so we try to kind of bring some with us and see if we could leave them off, that type of thing.
Right. Did he buy them from you, or was it done on credit basis?
I can't remember. He
Okay.
wouldn't have paid us right on the spot, but we might have collected them the last time or something like that.
Yeah.
But he left, I don't know, fairly early.
73 or 74.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
How about, what's the fellow's name out in Denver, also from the folklore center, Tufts, Harry?
No, not much of a connection there. I remember some letters or two back and forth, but Harry Tufts, was it?
I believe that's the name.
Yeah.
It's a reach for me, though. I'm
Right,
not sure.
definitely a reach for me.
The Denver Folklore Center.
Never visited it. McCabe's in Santa Monica, they actually, were okay customer.
Okay.
They sold some stuff for a while there anyhow. But there wasn't, most of our stuff was through distributors as opposed to direct. We certainly never turned down anybody that wanted to buy something from us.
Yeah, you said most of the
And
stores.
rarely would we say, you've got to see our distributor. We'd just be happy to sell them. Our philosophy was kind of, if they don't know our distributor and they're trying to buy from us, well, we should just sell it to them.
What's the first Cooper Library of Congress recordings that you worked on?
The Aunt Molly Jackson album that Archie
Political song?
did, yeah. She was recorded by the Lomaxes, or at least Alan. And Archie suggested doing an album of her. She was a coal mine woman. I don't think she had her mind full, but several of her relatives did. And she was active in some of the strikes around Harlan and Hazard, Kentucky and stuff. And wrote a number of songs about it, as did her sister, Sarah Ogan Gunning. Half-sister, I guess. No, full sister. They were full sisters, yeah. So it was Sarah Jackson Ogan Gunning.
Did you get to know Archie real well?
Not real well, but he was our idol, anyhow, just because he was so enthusiastic, into this kind of music and into it, deeply into it. Traditional music, but with the political and social perspective.
Where'd you connect with him?
I think we met him at the Archive of Folk Song at the Library of Congress, probably. We used to spend a lot of time in Washington, not just around the folklore festival, Folklife Festival, but we just used to spend a lot of time there. It was a good stopping over place. There were different people that we stayed with, because we never stayed in hotels or motels or stuff like that. But different people we knew we could easily stay with, and it was a good place to break the trip if you're going further south and stuff. We just spent a lot of time around the library.
Did you get to know Rinsler well there?
No, more Alan Jabor and Joe Hickerson, because Rinsler was, I don't know if he was ever really much at the Library of Congress. Certainly early on he was Smithsonian.
I meant D.C. in general.
Yeah. Yeah, so we often saw him, but he was, the Library of Congress archive there was kind of the home place in a way. I did some research there once. I wrote a paper on I went through the whole card catalog of everything they had and made a list of all the stuff that wasn't in their catalog, because they published a catalog, but there were certain sexually oriented and politically oriented songs, revolutionary sort of songs. Those are the two broad categories that they didn't publish in the catalog because they didn't want people to see that they had them. Congress people could start saying that they were, collecting sex and communism and whatever. But I just, when I heard about that, I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I just actually literally went through the whole catalog. Then they published a paper on that subject, which I was highlighting some years later.
Now, did Hickerson and Alan Jabor want you to release more of their stuff? What kind of stuff did they?
Yeah, I mean, they were never pushing stuff on us because that wouldn't really be all that appropriate. But we a couple times distributed it was a kind of on again, off again type of thing as far as distributing the Library of Congress's own LPs. Because there were always other people around fussing stuff. And, sometimes they'd say, fine, that's great. And we'd sell them for a year or two, and then we'd get a letter that or Joe would call us up and say, listen, we have to stop doing that because they're thinking we shouldn't be in commercial business.
Oh.
We should just sell them ourselves here, and we shouldn't be, trying to drum up business. It's too much, looks like something else. It's kind of weird, but they, they often introduced us to people. That was how we met. Remember, you asked about the first album in the 2000 series, George Henry Bussey and Jim Bunkley.
Right.
We met George Mitchell down at the Archive of Folk Song also. He just happened to be in there the same day that we happened to wander in. And so we got introduced to each other, and we would talk, and he said, I have these field recordings. It's that type of thing.
Yeah, I'm going to ask, why don't you look through this and tell me what are some of the other older field recordings you released, say, in the 70s?
Of course, most of them are recordings that we did ourselves. The Anne Molly Jackson album I was just talking about, that came out in August '72. So that was one of the we had only 5 albums out by the end of '71. That must have been one of the first dozen albums that we actually started working on.
Was you didn't record that?
No, that was recorded for the Library of Congress back in the 30s. We edited down. She had enough to put out maybe 4 albums worth of stuff, maybe more. We will actually put out more of her stuff in the Alan Lomax collection coming out. We'll probably do quite a number, at least 2 albums, maybe 4. So most of these are recordings that we did ourselves. But from George Mitchell, the first album that we did from him came out that same year, '72. There was another album. We put out 2 albums from him that year. And then he introduced us, I think, to David Evans, and we had an album of his that we put out the following year, '73.
Who was that? Who was the artist?
It was a collection called South Mississippi Blues. It's a collection of a lot of different things. John Cohen that we were talking about, the High Atmosphere album. It's a banjo and ballads collection. Came along sometime. I think that took a little while to get out. That came out in July '75.
Is that stuff he did in the South, the 50s,
Yes.
60s?
Yeah. 60s, I think. I don't know about the 50s. But it was a really nice collection. We just put it out on CD about 4 or 5 years ago. That Louisiana Aces album was not other people's field recordings, but it was, well, of course, many of these were stuff we did at people's homes, as I said, before. Asa Martin, his home, we went up to, late '74, we recorded Joe Cormier's Scottish American fiddle player from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, but he actually lives not far from here. And he used to play at a place called the French Club or the Franco-American Society, whatever. It was kind of like a fraternal weekend social club. And he played over there, and we ended up deciding to do an album of that, which came out nicely. Yeah, I don't know, just different albums we did different places. Mostly the first bunch were ones that we went out and did ourselves. It's still true. At some point in around 1975 or late 70s, no, actually the first album came out in March 75, so sometime in 73 even, or early 74, we got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. It was $10,000, which was a tremendous amount of money back then for us. It was the max you could get under this thing called youth grants, and it was meant to encourage young people that were trying to do some stuff. And so
we were all 30 at the time.
Well, yeah, younger. Plus we had Marion be the principal signatory because she was several years younger than us. So she was definitely in her 20s. Well, I was been 28, and she was 24 probably. And we just thought it was good to have a woman as the president and all that kind of stuff. But we got the grant. It was to do a series of recordings on the history of bluegrass music from the small labels. That's how I got the idea of the Tex-Mex one later on, really. But it was Dick Spotswood's idea out of Washington, because he had a lot of these locally produced singles, sometimes companies that only put out one or two records and then disappeared. Yeah. And we made a 10-album series out of it. That was probably the best bargain that the National Endowment ever got. Give somebody $10,000 and have 10 albums come out as a result. And they were good. We did a very good job. We went around and interviewed people from totally obscure people that had dropped out of the music, 20 years earlier, and we were totally shocked to have us show up on their doorsteps in the middle of East Kentucky, to Wilbur Lee and Stoney Cooper, their first recordings for the Richard Tone label out of Tennessee, and so forth. And we went around and did little, still hasn't come out on CD yet, and it's taken forever to say, let's go ahead and do it. He wants to remaster everything and so forth and so on.
So it's not in the works.
It's not even really in the works that much. One of these days.
Now, did the three of you go down and do this?
Yeah, not always all at the same time. I know I did a lot of the stuff. For some reason, I was driving around by myself there for a while, chasing down these people.
Where'd you stay?
I'm not sure where they were. Usually, we slept in the car because we had a VW bus, and as many as three of us slept in the car all at the same time. It was easy when there's only one. Three was a little hard. Yeah, it's hard to conceive of these days, but we did it for a whole summer. We used to, the biggest worry was where we were going to park it, because we didn't, we had curtains that all set up so you could pull the curtains shut all the way around so people couldn't see in. But still, where are you going to park? Usually what we ended up doing is parking in church parking lots, because that seemed like a good, safe place. I mean, motorcycle gangs don't usually hang out at churches that much or whatever. And usually, you could pull down the side, and the worst thing that was going to happen is that somebody's going to come over and ask you, and then, we'd be very innocent and so forth.
Would you call on people cold, right?
Yeah. No, usually we call on people cold, because writing them didn't necessarily make a lot of sense, and we didn't know their phone numbers, and we didn't want to spend the money to make the phone call. It's kind of absurd. You go drive like 100 miles to see somebody instead of making a phone call. They might not have been there, but really, we had very good luck finding people.
Do you remember any of those visits? I mean, you got any of those incidents? Showing up at a doorstep.
I can't remember. We looked kind of weird too. So showing up at some of these people's doorsteps, they probably were afraid at first.
I see some pictures, you have a ponytail,
Yeah.
pull your hair back.
Yeah, but it's still kind of bushy and
Kind of scraggly.
obviously long. Yeah, Ken had a beard the whole time. I had them off and on. And Marion, by standards today, was equally to be, wearing jeans and a t-shirt and long hair too. So we all kind of frightened some people, I'm sure. I can, people, to give people credit. I mean, people were very open in a way because, you see Easy Rider or something like that as a film, and people could take all kinds of attitudes. I'm sure there was a lot of talk about us behind our backs.
Sure.
Saying, "Oh, did you see those people? Can you believe that they would, look like that, but much less try to do business looking like that?"
Well, would you travel with rounder stock, show them what you were? I mean, how did you present yourself?
I have no idea. I mean, I imagine, this sounds familiar to me as I say it, that we would have walked up with a couple albums under our arm, so we could immediately show them, we're from Rounder Records, we're a record company that, for instance, see a couple of the records that we've done, and we've known about you, and we'd really like to know if we could, talk to you for. I can't remember anybody that truly shut us out. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I should do this. An interview now. Something about world music.
Okay.
Our home.
You mind if I? Let's do it. Yeah. Back on board with Ken Irwin, June 9th, 1999. One of the things that I was asking Bill about, which he didn't have much memory of, was when you were organizing the Masters of Bluegrass series that you did back in the 70s. They said that you went down...
What, the early days of Bluegrass?
Yeah, that's what the early days of Bluegrass. Yeah, when you went down, you did that at the behest of, was it Javor or Hickerson or Ralph Rinsler?
Dick Spotswood.
Dick Spotswood, okay. And these were things that he had these old records, and you guys went out to do what?
Well, he had a bunch of old records that were mainly really great bluegrass from right after the first batch, early 50s, mid 50s, some late 50s, and some probably into the 60s. They were really good music, but weren't like the top 5 groups, and very little had been known about the artists. In some cases, virtually nothing. Connie and Babe and the Backwoods Boys, for instance, had, Connie and Babe and the Backwoods Boys, for example, had sort of disappeared from view, and nobody even knew who Connie was or Babe. And there were some songs with Connie and Joe, and some with Connie and Babe, and people didn't know if they were the same group, or it was, in some cases it was less than that. And so we went down south trying to collect information, find photos, do interviews, to go along with the music that Dick had selected.
How'd you find people?
We
You're
just
20 years removed.
I mean, a lot of it was semi-detective work, just asking people, sometimes knowing where they had lived at a particular time, sometimes checking addresses, sometimes if there was a publisher involved in the song, checking and finding out where the last address was that they paid royalties to, asking musicians. It was a real variety.
This took you one summer, or did you do it over a more extended
Well,
period?
the majority was one summer, and then we did some follow-ups after that.
Do you recall the year?
No.
Okay. Now, it was the 3 of you went together?
Yeah.
All of you?
We were all living in the VW bus.
That's what you slept in?
Yeah.
And where'd you park?
Wherever. It really varied. I mean, there was one time when we were going to visit an artist, and we had been driving for quite a while. We had been in contact, and we had been sleeping in the car, and we were feeling a little bit raunchy. And so we all got in our bathing suits and went down to the car wash, and it had the kind of car wash that you have high-powered hoses.
Yeah.
So we just sat right next to the car. We hit the car real hard, and the water would come off in the spray like a shower. And we'd sit there in the car wash, washing off, and showed up there, and looked as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as can be.
You said you were in contact. Did you frequently get in touch with people first? Did you do cold calls? Show up?
We tried to call beforehand. Whenever possible.
Okay. But what generally? Anything you remember about any of those contacts? Any specific people?
Well, most people were very, very open, and in some cases bewildered. The Church Brothers were really bewildered that anybody would have interest in their recordings.
How many sides had they done?
They did something like 15, they recorded a whole bunch. We did a whole album in the early days of Bluegrass series on the Church Brothers, and part of it was sort of an unusual situation there, but part of it was that the daughter of the owner of the record company, Drusilla Adams, was a songwriter, and so she wrote these songs, and then the Church Brothers recorded them. So she sort of had her own in-house band to do her music. But to the best of my knowledge, none of the Church Brothers even had an instrument that they played. Sometimes they didn't have any in the house, and they were, really, really surprised.
Was anybody suspicious of of what was going on? Who you were? You must have looked awfully northern to them.
Yeah,
northern and young.
I think there's something in the love of the music and the passion that gets by an awful lot of that. There's some talk on the Bluegrass L now about people who are seriously into bluegrass, and it seems like there's it's like a community, and I think it's more important that and care about the music. And when you can talk intelligently and mention some of the songs, I think that went way beyond. And who had paid attention to these people anyway since? In some cases they did. There was some, a cut with early Osbournes, or there were a few things like that. But for the most part, it was people who people had forgotten about, and were probably never really known even at the time. So they were just thrilled that the people cared.
Do you recall? Well, let me backtrack a little bit. Did you spent some time, I know, at the Library of Congress?
Mm.
What were you doing there? What did you do? What brought you there? Were you just researching for the hell of it, for fun? For why were the three of you hanging out there? I know you met Jabor and Joe Hickerson. How did that come about initially?
Well, it was sort of like a home away from home. It was people who we knew cared about traditional music and knew a lot about it, and we were just trying to learn everything we could, and find people who would be open, who would suggest projects, or let us know about other projects. We'd listen to the library's releases, and sometimes check the files to see if there'd be enough things in the library that we might want to license and put out. Read books, just to talk.
Did Joe and Alan Jabor spend time with you?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I think you tend to think now that people in those offices are going to sit down. And, do you think? Did it have a lot to do with the fact that you were a record company? Did you first present yourself as guys in records, or was it even before that?
No,
before
it
you put out records?
we're a new record company, and
Okay.
we'd probably put out a couple records at the time.
Okay.
And it seems to me that we sort of semi-invited ourselves over to Alan Jabor's house too. He put us up for part of one of our stays.
What was your first Library of Congress recording? Do you remember? I probably got it.
Probably the Aunt Molly Jackson.
What was the genesis of that project?
That was probably Archie, I think. Because
Makes
we
sense,
only
I
put
guess.
out the political material.
Only Aunt Molly's political material.
Yeah,
Where'd you
we-
meet him?
Where did we? Probably at Wolf Trap or the Smithsonian Folklife Festival.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It was definitely in Washington.
Okay. Okay. Now, Ed Monley, was she alive at the time?
No, she had died quite a bit before. But Sarah Van Gunning was still alive, and Jim Garland was still alive.
Okay. And did you talk to them about the connection with the project?
You know, I don't think I was all that involved with the Aunt Molly
Was
project.
that Bill's project?
I think so, and I think Marion too, more than myself.
Do you recall what Rounder's first reviews were? Do you recall ever getting some sense that your records are getting reviewed?
Well, the first one was probably the county sales newsletter.
Okay. That's county records.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And they distribute other labels, and then they sell them in their mail order.
Okay. Are those real reviews? I mean, given that it's a sales sheet, were they real reviews?
Oh, they weren't
with
lengthy,
potential?
but I remember they were. On one of them, I think it was the Pegram, it said it was an auspicious beginning or something like that, or it seemed like that they were reasonably well done, and it seemed like the beginning of a new label.
Okay. How about in any kind of more general interest publication? I don't know what was around back then. There was no Bluegrass Unlimited or Bluegrass.
Bluegrass Unlimited was around.
70?
Oh yeah, they
70?
they predated us by more than 5 years.
Okay. For some reason I had mid-70s.
Yeah, they just had
pegged
their 35th, I think.
When did they first review you?
Well, the one that I remember most was the Joe Val record.
Okay, that was number 3?
Yeah,
or
that
four?
was number 3. And the review was by Walt Saunders, Walter V. And he gave it a glowing review. I think it was 4 or 5 stars. And we wrote to him, and he wrote back, and we became very good friends. And Marion and I stayed there many times when passing through. And he came up with some ideas of recordings. I guess the first one would have been the Bailey Brothers. We did 2 records of Bailey Brothers. That was his idea. And Johnny Wisnett was his idea. And years later, in about 1980, I guess the Johns Mountain Boys was his and his wife's idea.
Did you feel yourself moving into a community early on? Or were you kind of lone wolves contacting people
We were
project
too
by
far
project?
away. I think we felt that we had a couple of little communities here. There was the Boston Blues Society, and we went to all their shows, and we were sort of involved with them.
The Blues Society?
Yeah.
Not the Friends of Bluegrass, the Blues
No,
Society.
that was another.
Okay.
There were both. There was and then there was the Folk Song Society of Greater Boston. And fairly early on, we'd have to check the date, but if you found the date for Biconti, that would be a good one, because we got people from the Boston Blues Society and the Boston Area Friends and the Folk Song Society, and put on a little festival at Tufts. It had Biconti and the Bailey Brothers, and I think Ola Bell Reed. It was a really pretty cool festival. It was just a couple-day one, but it was like the first attempt at sort of bridging the gaps between the various organizations.
Do those things still exist? Are there inheritors of Boston Blues Society still around?
It might be. I haven't been involved. The Boston Area Friends isn't, but a group that split off from that, the Boston Bluegrass Union, just had our 20th anniversary. I think we're 21 now.
Okay.
And we've been putting on shows all that time.
When you say we've been putting on shows, how do you mean we've been putting on? Rounder does the shows?
No, I've been very active.
Oh,
I've
just
been
the
part of
society,
Boston
as the
Bluegrass
society.
Union.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I was going to ask you more about that. I'd like to explore a little bit the way in which the label has linked itself up with other organizations that promote, the type of music you do,
Mhm.
and even beyond that, the type of culture that the music reflects. Talk a little bit about that, maybe through history. That's it.
That's sort of hard. Well, the early one.
And that's something I
think-
could say. We could do that off this, maybe if you have the time, or do it by email and
Yeah.
sit down. Because I'd like to I really would like to try and link up some of those things and make those connections.
Yeah. Well, I think might have to try to find a couple other people to remember more about that first festival that that was at Tufts. I think we called it the Boston Folk Festival, but I'm not sure. And Don Stover was there too. Don Stover played old time banjo. We didn't have him as a bluegrass group. We got up there and played old time banjo, and I think Herb Hooven played some fiddle, so they had some fiddle and banjo. But Don played just old time banjo and maybe a little bit guitar. It was more of a the folk singer rather than a bluegrasser. And we also were involved. Bill had an early radio show, I don't know if he mentioned that, at MIT, where he was known as Willie the Weeper, the Midnight Creeper.
You tell me that, yeah.
And Marion and I did reviews for a publication in Worcester called Perspective. And
now, is this pre-label? Bill's radio show actually predated the label, didn't it, a little bit?
Yeah, I think it probably did. We were living in Worcester at the time, yeah. I think it would. Marion was still, or right about the time that we started. And we wrote as much to get free records as anything else, but also really, we really had gotten into it by then.
Yeah.
And later on, Marion and I wrote for Tia Hero, which was an alternative, very political publication out of Ithaca.
Okay.
When we lived in a commune there, we were like the cultural part of this group that ranged from weather people to one guy who was gay and otherwise not political. It's this full gamut.
His politics was being gay.
Yeah,
right.
Right. And that was, for someone to admit it at that point, was was a very
again,
strong
we're
political
pre-label,
statement.
aren't we, Ithaca? Or
No, we started pretty much when Marion and I think, were in Ithaca and Bill was in Cambridge.
Okay.
We were long distance.
Right. Okay.
And then, as I said, we got involved with, early on with the Boston area Friends, and were involved with that. And at some point we realized that what we thought was cooperation was that the person who was the person in charge was really only viewing this as a group effort when our thoughts agreed with hers. And we weren't the only ones that came to this conclusion, and eventually the group split off and everybody left her and formed the Boston Bluegrass Union, and everybody else who had been part of the organization. I think that Bill was more involved with the Boston Blues Society than either Marion or I. Then I think I mentioned we started Marion and I founded the Ithaca Area Friends of Bluegrass and Old Time Country Music. Right. We really stretched that. We also had Larry Johnson out. Okay. We decided that country music, he played country blues.
Yeah.
That was a slight stretch. Not the Larry Johnson that plays with the Knicks.
I understand.
And we put on shows by George Pegram and Red Allen, Frank Wakefield, Don Stover, Tex Logan, Bob Tidwell, Larry Johnson. We tried to have one with George Pegram, but we sent him down his plane tickets, and we went to meet him, and apparently he got as far as New York, didn't know he was supposed to change planes, and ended up going back down to North Carolina. So we started out with a little bit of a loss. We had Joe Val and the New England Bluegrass Boys.
And we're early 70s?
Yeah.
In here? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And later, after we moved back to Massachusetts, Mary and I had radio shows at both WCAS, which was an AM dawn to dark Cambridge station, and WMFO at Tufts. We had bluegrass shows.
And then on into IBMA much later.
IBMA later on, and then Folk Alliance, and I was on the board of both of those for quite a while. I think mentioned earlier that we were founding members of NAIRD.
Right.
I don't know if that was originally in the car conversation, so it might not have been there.
Yeah, we talked about it
Yeah.
a little bit, yeah. That's more of a business type thing than,
Right.
I guess, a cultural thing. But,
Right.
Any other things? We looked before at talk about forming a polka association, and are there others? I know there's lots of blues societies, and you've mentioned
Yeah.
involved with some of those. Have you ever been involved in Cajun groupings or?
No, I've been very frustrated. I've met with people from the Cajun French Music Association, but every time I meet with them, I speak to somebody, and then the next year they're gone.
Uh-huh.
And I've brought down things from IBMA and Folk Alliance and showed them, what things could be, but just haven't run into the right person could function. But I think eventually that'll happen. But right now, there are so few Cajun artists who really have a feel for what it's like being out, and there aren't that many that are willing to take a shot at going for it. Like going at full time and getting a booking agent. They just don't realize the possibilities.
Who are the top three most likely to break out right now? I mean, don't even talk about the past.
There's a group we just started working with called I think it's Charivari. Mitch Reed, who used to play with Balfour Toujours and has been a sort of a protege of Mike Doucet and fiddle player. There was also a group called Macaulay, Reed, and Vadrine. It's a very, very traditional trio. And Reed was the son of Revon Reed, who used to play I think it was the Mamu Radio Hour or something like that a lot of people went to. And Randy Vadrine was the guitar player, and he's with Mitch in this new band. So I think they have the potential. Don't see that many other Cajun groups ready to bust out.
Is Rounder working with those three, or they're just?
Well, we're working with Charivari, I think
Okay.
is the pronunciation, and we're still working with Bruce Dagerpont and
Right.
Steve Riley. And
Do either of those two have the potential to, become stars on the order of a Beausoleil or something like that?
Steve definitely does, and the difficulty with getting to that level is that they weren't around at the right point. And I think Marion is more likely to talk about that kind of thing, with Thorogood. But Beausoleil was out there touring when the Big Easy hit,
Okay.
and when the excitement hit. And a lot of times you'll find when a musical form creates a lot of excitement that people sort of lock in on those people from that time.
Yeah.
In the same way in folk circles, there are people like Richie Havens who, were still making a very good living, who were, they were there at that time,
Yeah.
and there are many people who are excellent, writers now, or singers, or both, that don't have that other audience that people did from the Woodstock generation in that time period. So it'll take something for people. I mean, for years, when many people thought of Cajun, they thought of Beausoleil. It's just that association.
And I guess what you're suggesting, though, of course, is that you're really suggesting, I think, that to a lot of people it all sounds alike, and there's room for only one. If you're going to buy a Cajun record, you'll buy a Beausoleil record, and we'll buy another.
I was thinking more in terms of if you're a talent buyer.
Okay. Okay. So you were saying you were talking more about talent buyers in terms of.
Yeah, if somebody, I mean, that's very important in establishing a name and establishing familiarity with an audience is being out there performing.
Right.
And if the talent buyers are thinking Cajun, Beausoleil,
Right.
rockabilly, Stray Cats,
Uh-huh.
whatever, that association is, it's very important. And Beausoleil was there at the right time. I mean, they had more than that. They had excitement, and
Yeah.
they had excellent musicianship, and a real variety of music, and they put on a good show. But they also were there at the same time, and it's just that much harder for someone else once they get there, to edge into that position where there aren't that many people buying a particular kind of music, especially one that
I want to know what. This is probably an unfair question. What recording do you remember doing most fondly? I don't mean liking the music. What was the most enjoyable, exciting recording experience you have had at Rounder? And if you've got to
Boy,
name
that's
3 of them,
tough.
do that. Or what comes to mind, do it as
I
a
think,
a Rorschach test.
I-
Go ahead.
the first Longview record
Uh-huh.
was
Why?
very exciting. The first Longview record I sometimes describe as my 25th anniversary gift to myself. And I've been a strong believer in and lover of traditional bluegrass, and there hasn't been that much of that music around for a while, and Longview came about as a it was putting together 3 singers at a festival, just to have a little Rounder segment for our 24th anniversary, and the singing was just so incredible. It was Dudley Connell and James King and Don Grigsby, and when they hit the high notes on Stanley Brothers' Angels Are Singing, it's just like, it was just like this incredible experience, and I just knew I had to document it. And then getting everybody together at Longview, which is the name of the studio, Longview Farm Studio, which is a residential recording place. You go out there, and in the morning you come downstairs and they have breakfast ready for you, and then give them half an hour notice, and lunch is there. Just this great place. And the people are just very, very warm and supportive, and so the atmosphere was great. But then to have all these people, musicians and singers, who had this common love and passion for traditional music, and most of them grew up almost worshiping the first generation people, especially the Stanley Brothers, and to start, to hear these people talk, and they'd be talking about Reno and Smile, and say, that second break on, and when he hits the microphone with his banjo, and like 5 out of the 6 people knew. I mean, it's just incredible. The people had studied and immersed themselves, to that point, and you could just see the way things came together, both musically, and people developed into a band, like right in front of our eyes. It's just, everything was just so right. And then at the end of the session on the Saturday night, we had a concert, and people, performed, the group performed live, so that everything that I had been hearing and seeing develop, all of a sudden we sort of have this thing where they actually performed. It was just a lovely experience.
Now, after you saw them perform at this festival, did you do their session right then and there? Did you get it together, or did you have to
No,
make
it took it,
arrangements?
no,
You gotta- how
because they
long
were
did
in
it
all
take?
different groups.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
it took over a year,
Okay,
maybe 2 years before we actually got it.
okay.
And it was just the three singers, and then a couple of them, a couple of the singers got together at another festival, and we sort of decided who the banjo player and fiddle player were going to be from that.
What else do you remember with fondness? I know it doesn't have to be your favorite. or
Oh,
your
there are
peak, but
lots of them. The
uh,
Whitstein Brothers recording sessions, just really, really special. I love those guys.
Had you gotten to know them before you approached them to record, or?
Just slightly. We went down to visit them once, I think, beforehand.
This is back when? When did you do it?
More than 10 years ago now. I'm not very good on dates.
All right. Well, go on. You went down to visit them beforehand.
Yeah, but it was really, I think it may have been, I think Hazel and I went down to visit them the first time. And they're just some of the loveliest people, and I still spend a lot of time. I usually stay with them when I'm in Nashville. Sort of my family. That even when Allison won her 4 CMA awards, instead of going to the parties afterwards and being congratulated by everybody, I felt much more comfortable going back and spending time with the Whitsteins. Just sort of celebrating it quietly. They're just such good, down-to-earth people. I mean, there are so many. I really loved that first D.L. Menard or Bateau in the Louisiana.
I was going to ask, what's your
session.
favorite Louisiana session? Go ahead, tell me.
I mean, that was one, when we were recording in D.L.'s bedroom, and the whole band was in the kitchen, and that was really special. And again, they're shirt off your back type people. You hear about things like that, but they were just so wonderful, and the music was so infectious, and being right there, that was great. There was a time. I mean, there are times that were real recording sessions, but we had a get together with Allison before she recorded, a while before. She was so young that I thought that she might be too much in awe of some of the players that we wanted to use. And so I called up Bela Fleck and asked if we could, have some people over so she could meet them. And I think it was like Sam Bush and John Cowan. She was a big Newgrass Revival fan. And Jerry Douglas.